Καλώς ήρθατε στο Καναδικό Ινστιτούτο στην Ελλάδα. Είναι ιδιαίτερη τιμή και χαρά να σας υποδέχτουμε απόψε για μία διάλεξη από έναν από τους σημαντικότερους ειδικούς στην αθηναϊκή προσωπογραφία, ο καθηγητής John Traill. C'est toujours un plaisir de vous accueillir ici, à l'Institut. Ce soir, on a un plaisir supplémentaire, c'est qu'on a la présence du professeur Traill. Et donc, et je vous invite aussi, j'en profite pour vous faire part, vous aviser que vous allez recevoir très prochainement l'invitation pour nos célébrations du 50e anniversaire. When I prepared, welcome everybody, you know, I was working say, how will I present John Traill? And so I asked my colleague Jonathan, I said, Jonathan, send me something, you know, biography of John Traill. And so he sends me something. And then Professor Traill sends something. And then so I have all this information, all this documentation, and I say to myself, who doesn't know John Traill?
There you go.
You know, in Athens, if you're in Athens, if you've been working with any of the foreign schools and the Greek service, and you're an archaeologist, you know John Traill. Professor Traill studied at University of Toronto, and he also studied, of course, at Harvard, where he received his AM, PhD degrees. He spent 2 years as a postdoctoral research associate at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Princeton, and he was 8 years at the American School of Classical Studies in Athens. He doesn't publish that much. He only has 26 books. The most recent one just appeared a few years ago in June of 2021. And he has served also as editor and co-editor of an additional 5 volumes. You occasionally eat and sleep and
Well, you don't have to publish that much. You publish a bit, and then you correct it.
Now, the main topics of his research, of course, have been Greek inscriptions, the topography of Athens and Attica, and especially the prosopography of ancient Athens. And for more than 4 decades, he has directed the Athenians Project, a research venture applying modern electronic technology to ancient data. For more than 40 years, you know, that's because 40 years ago I had just I had just arrived as a young member at the French school, with a computer, and they hadn't seen the computer. And so when I was looking at this Athenians project, I said, so he was really one of the first, one of the very first. Λοιπόν, and so in recent years, yes, the Athenians Project, has been a member of another group which is called BRAIN, Big Data Research and Analytics Information Networking Alliance, a consortium of scholars in computing science in the 4 major universities in the Toronto area. Now, his lecture this evening, entitled Inscriptions Illuminating Ancient Athens, makes use of the online open access, this is important, interesting, open access database. Professor Traill and his computer colleagues, Philippa Matheson and Dan Durkak, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that well, have created. So without any more time here, I introduce you, Professor Traill. Bonne conférence.
C'est un grand plaisir. O filma pala, sus Elinas, que sinalada, logo menamado, du levamado, spudasmado, sii ton deon. O filma pala, efkaristuma, panopoli, Elinas, que elas elada, ja hola u dosita llamas. Well, I don't recognize that person that Jacques has introduced, but I will pretend for a little while that I am that person. When I offered to give a talk to the Canadian Institute, I had in mind the 50th anniversary. I'm a little bit in advance, just a couple of months though, but I like to think that I am part of that wonderful institution's celebration. It's about 50 years also that the Athenians project has been working with the computer, and there were two people involved in that major part, and we lost one of them on her 80th birthday on Greek Easter Sunday, a bit of a kairos. My colleague of all those years who did the other half, I like to think maybe the other 9/10, Philippa Matheson, died on that day, and we lost an enormous amount of that. I pretend to be head of this project, the Athenians, now Attica Online, but really it's everyone else's work. I just incorporate it and put my name on it at the bottom, and so I am not really the person who's responsible for all the mistakes, and as well as the few good points that the project. It's 50 years old now, and what I'm indebted to this large number of people, including my family. One member is here. There's another member of my family who's a lot smarter than you, a lot smarter than all of us. She's not here. She's not going to be tortured the way that you poor people are. She's heard too much already and knows better than that. Anyway, Corinna's here. Corinna's helped. Our three daughters all were brought up. You might say it was almost child labor. They had Greek from an early stage. You'll find her older sister, when she was 10, was going through Athenische Mitteilungen and copying down inscription. There's a childish hand in the cards that we had, and so on. So we have a large number of contributors, and they can be found at the website in the last of the acknowledgements section. I notice that we don't have Harry Kritsos there. We will add him immediately. So the two aspects that I'm going to be talking about tonight, I'm going to be talking about the people, and I'm going to talk about the places, and I have a long sort of history nurturing in this. Neither of my parents had a chance to go to college. My father was in the First World War and was injured and couldn't go to college, and my mother was the eldest of 6 children and had to go to work, but she did work up to being secretary to the Prime Minister at that time. From a very early age, my parents instilled in me the love of culture, of all subjects that are reasonably taught in the universities, but I, at a very early stage, became enamored with Athens and the achievement of Athens. And my mother, who died in my second year of college, kept saying, the progress you do, first you get an MA, where do you go to do that? Well, that was the University of Toronto in Canada. And then you go on, you do your MA, AM, and PhD at Harvard. She kept saying that over and over, and these sort of things get drilled in. When I was an undergraduate in my third year, Mary White, a wonderful person. Incidentally, I should have mentioned when I was talking about Philippa and her brother Mac were great friends of the Canadian school, CAIAT first, from the very beginning, and the Karastos project, the survey of southern Euboea, of which we have several members of the staff here, was a major project sponsored by the Canadian school, the Canadian Institute now. I mentioned the contributors, but I want to mention the other side of it. The first part I'm going to talk about, which has become the database of Athenians, the people. I became interested in the people of ancient Athens and where they live, the places, the demes. And those paths crossed as a graduate student when I started working on symbolutic lists of Athenian counselors, and that led to the publication of a number of inscriptions from the Agora, and meeting Ben Merritt, who was also another great supporter of this work. He had compiled a file and of names. It started out for a very simple reason. They were finding inscriptions in great numbers. The first day of the excavation in 1931 produced 25 inscriptions. And he was worried that they would publish the inscription and not notice that they'd already published it before. So for a very simple and practical reason, he started a card catalog of the names. Other people contributed to it, and it became a massive card, handwritten card, many of them in pencil, and as people rubbed them together, we were losing the information on them. So that grew to about 250,000 cards with various contributions. James Notopoulos, Demetrius Notopoulos, the Greeks always had a large connection with this project. Then Stamiris, Yorgos Stamiris, also helped Merritt, and so on. That grew to enormous proportions then and became unwieldy and very hard to handle, and we were losing information, so we turned to the computer. It didn't hurt that when I was a graduate student, one of my classmates of 4 was David Packard, whose daddy had something to do with computing, 2/3 of it, and David was a supporter of this from a very early stage. So I was involved with the publication of Bulutic lists, which were full of names. I got to meet Merritt, and I got to meet his file. He called it just his file of Attic prosopography. Very much like Philippa, the most humble person I've ever met was Philippa. When I was preparing to come to Athens, I knew she was in ill health. There was no question that I should postpone my trip. And I told her when I'd be talking at this lecture, how should I refer to her? She says, not a word. Do not mention me. And I said, that's impossible. Impossible. Apistepto. And so at very minimal, she said, you can mention in a limited number of words my contribution, enormous as it is, I've added. So the file was getting unwieldy, and we turned to the computer. By luck or chance, whatever, we had some friends in Princeton, a connection. Mary Smallwood was a friend of Geoffrey Woodhead. Mary knew the wife of Michael Barnett, and they were both computerists. And Michael knew Kelly Gottlieb, who was CC, who was the leading computerist in Canada, and he had a student, Dionysius Constantinos Tsikritsis, Greek a little. And Dennis put at our disposal a couple of his best students, and we took off from there. So I have here on the screen a sample from the Merritt file. These are the cards that my wife put together to save space. We needed to make a copy of it to secure the lettering of some of the entries and to do various other things. And so she put those together, and we created 27 volumes just of these cards. This is one. You can tell the handwriting of Merritt. That's the positive, strong, clear, no mistake writing. So we went on, and with the help of Dennis's students, we created a relational database. And this is the basic scheme. We have one relation for the main, the information on the people. These are basically the name of the person. We assign them a number, like a social security number, social insurance, tautotita, arithmos, and so on. And then we have some other information here. I'm not going to go down through all the details, but we have a relative, if necessary, another name going with that relative. We have other information about how reliable the name is, whether the person is a citizen or a foreigner or something of that sort. And then we go down to the identifier, which is what that person did. So we can retrieve all the people from a certain period. We have a span here of a date, the date that is actually given in the document, and then we interpret that in, what shall I say, a rigorous but not always sympathetic way. We try to make exceptions and so on. So we open windows there, and those are windows for computer searching. And then we have a number of other things at the bottom. If the kin has another relative, we can extend that. And then we have a grab bag at the very last of the attributes, which includes all sorts of other things for building a family tree and for connecting with other databases and things of that sort. And the reference relationship also has details. It's sort of how you cut the animal up that is our motive here, and we'll talk a little bit later about putting the animal back together again, so on. So all of that is contained in our treatment of those cards we just looked at, how we process them, and how we document them. I'll talk more about the text later on. It's the full polytonic Greek text with all the sigla you need to show what epigraphers like to fight over, dotted letters and restorations and that sort of stuff. And now we're adding to that, as I mentioned later on, photographs. We gathered this together, and I didn't publish very much. I just published one book, and then we copied it over and over. Nobody notices the difference when it gets that far, and so on. It's just, you know, what can I say? It just goes on. It's a it's like a nuclear reaction, you know. There's a critical mass, and then it just keeps on exploding, you know, so on. So there's no limit, but we did have to put a stop to it after 23. So most of those volumes that look as if I published a lot are really just a lot of, well, whatever we call it. I should say that when the family grew up, I wanted to liken our family to an Ontario family farm. The kids, as I mentioned, all went to Greek school. They learned Greek dancing too, as well as the language. And they were brought up in the tradition of epigraphy. I mentioned in an earlier stage that Mary White passed around, she passed around a squeeze at a meeting, and that convinced me totally. Corinna has some squeezes here she's going to pass around so you can touch the, not quite the living body, but you can touch something that touched the living body, as it were. These are paper impressions of inscriptions. If we had more time, I'd show you how we make these, though it's strictly forbidden now to make them, so I better be careful what I say. They do slight imperceptible damage, but if you make thousands of them, it's going to be perceptible, the damage. Mary White passed one of these around, it's got an Archon list. Incidentally, there's some information on that. If you put that into your smartphone, you can bring up all the names on that. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Better watch my time here. So, squeezes were very important in the building up of the knowledge, and we created quite a few of them. The project has 5,000, but that's nothing to what Princeton has, 35,000, or Berlin has 100,000. So this material was gathered together, and we brought it out in publication form. But everybody knew this was our promise from the beginning, that we'd bring it out in computer form. And we got sidetracked when the lexicon of Greek personal names brought out, and we looked as if our project was going to disappear. And they were good friends, incidentally, and my wife contributed 1/4 of the second volume of Attica with the information from R. So with Philippa's help, we created a database, an online, and this is the homepage of the website Attica. It has a foreword by Ben Merrick, we got his. We have an introduction, and that gives the sort of material we're working with, and where it's found, and that sort of thing, and how to get at it. Then we have the search program. I'm going to talk about that. We have some other things here. The reason I pause here is that in the 6th item, news, there's an interview. I was part of the interview, but Philippa, who, as I say, was more self-effacing than Jean Vanderpool, who I thought held the record in that, actually gave an interview. And so that's a rare commodity, and I ask you to look at that. We move on to the 2 fields I was most interested in were the people of Athens, and we've been gathering those together, but I was also interested in the places where they lived, the so-called demes. And when I talk to my scientific terminology, yes, they can't find any other Alouena Ilithios, Laskulos. When I teach that subject, I often dwell on democracy and show how wrong Google can be in the Oxford English. It doesn't pay any attention to the suffix, and worse, I shouldn't say worse, it forgets that demos is more than just the people. It's these little communities. This was the first democracy we know of, and it was the longest living, 1,000 years in antiquity, through various transformations. Iceland's catching up. It's got about 800 years, I think, now, but it will sooner or later. So this is a map of the, so to speak, a map, a chart of the various demes. There are 140 of them, and they're arranged. We used color. This is not my work. This is the work of Mr. Vanderpool. I mentioned in passing, the second most humble person I ever met, and so on. So he is responsible for putting the locations of them all, and there are 2 that I'd like to look at, concentrate on. Oops, excuse me, got to get back there. Kefisia, up to the north, up here, and I'm going to be talking about Freyaroi down here at the, that's Anaphlystos. Freyaroi is just, we got it over here. Sorry about that, I can't read my own picture at this point. So the map gathers together a lot of material, and it looks very complicated, and it is very complicated. You can see things strung out on the north, and you can see various strange aberrations. There's a green thing here, it's way out of place, and so on. As a political instrument, this was representation according to population. Those demes are the size, relatively speaking, of their population. Acarnania is the big one. It was in 2 sections up here, and so on. Marathon, everybody knows about that. That up on the coast, and so on. So I was pointing to Provalinthus there, sorry. Anyway, there are all these aberrations, and I had a tough time explaining in a political sense. But when we turn to the fact that Cleisthenes, who created this transformation of the Athenian situation, it was north against south, east against west, French against English, whatever, and it was a dreadful situation which led to a tyranny, Pisistratus and so on, and his sons. And Cleisthenes, we saw a statue, Gordon and I, her mother, out at Aya Marina yesterday to Cleisthenes. He created this scene, and we think of it as a political organization, and I've written a lot about that, but it's first and foremost a military organization. And then these things make a lot more sense. This is only recent. I haven't, it's for someone else to expound on or to completely destroy. You can see the emphasis on the north, and these strange creatures are part of the military organization, and we'd never have had the flowering of the political organization, the things that we know, the sculpture, the architecture, the vases, all of the jewelry, and so on. All the achievement had not been for that military organization with the accidental discovery or invention of the trireme. So Athens in the 5th century, before the Common Era, became the leading military force that we know of, certainly in Greece. The Spartans were were on land, but the Athenians ran around them with the trireme and so on, and they were fighting a lost cause against that. Anyway, so the military organization is just as important, if not more important, than the political organization. I'm wasting too much time. So we have the map, thanks to Philippa, is interactive. You can click on the places, and it will take you to the table of information. And this is highly compressed, not my usual sort of thing. I usually write a lot, and here I've written very little, and of course it's always someone else's material. So you can click on the deem, and that's important. The word democracy has that connotation of these little communities. So on one time, I'll lose myself in the digression pretty soon. I was on a CBC radio TV program interviewed about, they wanted to talk about Athens, but I wanted to talk about how to reform the Canadian Senate and so on. I got away with it for a while, and then they cut me off. The 10 largest cities in Canada, each one of those would have one vote. We have a lot of coastal area, just like the Athenians. They would each 10 sections, and we have inland areas. We put them together, and they'd have to get along. So the Athenian system. In any case, the information is summarized on these tables, and I have kept to a limit. Now we have part of the introduction to one of the volumes. I know this is boring. My students, I know because after 63 years I have children of someone and grandchildren, and they come back and they sit in the back, and of course they turn on their smartphones. I'm hoping you're turning yours on already to the Attica website, but they're watching soap Mythistorima at the back of the room, and I don't blame them at all. I'm the first one to put myself to sleep with these things. Here's part of the introduction, and I've given you a section here where it talks about the way we arrange the names, simple names, qualification, and then finally, and the demotic, that's important, and so on. And we have another section here where we talk about the role, the sex, the citizenship, the Roman citizenship, slave. I could digress quite a bit on slavery. I'm not going to. I've talked enough already on that line. Let's move on down through. This is the search form, recherche, and it's les deux langues nous avons au Canada, bien sûr, and so we have a bilingual form. I just corrected an error a little while ago. We have the sex using words for animals in French rather than the better homme et femme, so on. Anyway, this is the form we have, and this is where you put in your information. And when I ask you in a few minutes, it's like, oh, sorry, I don't want that. I'm going to ask you to use that box to put a number in. So you can put all different things in here. You can put the name or part of the name. You can add the deem, okay, the demotic there. You can specify a relationship, or you can't, or you don't have to. You can put in another person's name there, and so on. And then here you can put almost anything you want, if you want an archon or so on. That's the description. And then we have this window date from date to that I talked about. And then we have a reference here, if you can put that in, and the comment here. And at the very back, I'm going to ask you to put in image in capitals, and later on to bring up the new phase of the project, the new light that we're shedding on ancient Athens by means of looking at images. Sometimes they're images of squeezes. Squeezes are important because they give us a slight three-dimension, and that can be utilized with now digital photography. They also are taken sometime where the original has been lost, and so the squeeze becomes the primary document, and so on. So anyway, that's the search form. I spent enough time on it. We need to move on. And here we have tips for searching, and so we give some help here to instill some precepts into the user. And the best way, of course, of learning this is to just practice with it, so on. And that's what people should be doing now, and not paying any attention to what I'm saying, because you'll get more information from finding what Philippa did in developing this. And we have, un moment, s'il vous plaît, we have autre chose ici. Voyez, mes enfants, que nous avons ici, nous avons les deux langues au Canada. Pardon, l'accent affreux. But anyway, of course, this is the proper thing to do. And we have a bilingual form here, and we have bilingual, don't look too carefully, des fautes, and so on. But we have, of course, paid attention to that, and that's not without some eye toward, years ago, grant applications. So on, I need not say, Jacques knows better than I about this sort of thing. So let's move on. I'm wasting too much time. I've got a sample here. If you remember the colors, I could go back to that. This is the way they are. Remember I talked about cutting the animal up. This is putting the animal back together, but in a computer sort of way, and so the blue things I had, I could go back to that, but I think I'm boring already, come out in blue in this, and so on. It's a way to move from that search form, incidentally, which is on the back of your handout. We have the form up on the top, and then we have two samples below. And I noticed there's some mistakes in the sample still. We're always correcting our mistakes. I mentioned that. That's how we get publications. I have indeds in the brownish first line there of Habrillis. We put Habrillis on because she's a nice person and so on, and we know something about her, and we love all our 100,000 here equally. Anyway, I've got indeds, that in dedications. It didn't get mapped at that time. That's correct now, and we've actually cut her off. She has several more relatives at the bottom. Then we have a second guy. He's a Roman guy, Marcus Julius Caesar. Well, not quite, but Marcus Annius Pythagoras. What do you do with characters like that? Well, you put them in all three different places and you cross-reference them, and the computer has no trouble handling that. So this shows how the search form on the top, this is where it's better than the screen, is mapped to the animal being put together at the bottom, and so on. Incidentally, yeah. So that's the general idea, and those are the samples, and that's the second sample I have. They're better seen on your printed handle, which Mansour did for me. Oh, I've done something wrong there. Okay, we move down to a couple of samples. Here I've got, I moved too fast. Let's get back. The first sample is we're going to search for vectors, dramatic vectors, and we've chosen the subject of the Lanaya. Could have been the Dionysia. Highly specialized, of course, but this gives us a list, and it tells us at the bottom, I printed only the last 3 or 4 of the group, and it tells us how many entries and how many different people. We'll see what that means later on. So the sample up at the top gives a search form and what information was put into that, and it gives results at the bottom, and that's the very last of it. I didn't put it. You can try this on your own. You can take that information, put it in the database, and hope that it works. Another topic, women's study is very important. It's true that only 1/9 of our database is women, but 11 or 12,000 women is more than we have of any other state in antiquity, We have barely 1,000 of the next. We have 100,000 at Athens. So we know more about women in Athens than we know, of course. We would like to have more of these, and we're finding more. So I've asked here, and it shows you on the form what we put in sorry, I'll push that again. Back we are. I put in at the top here my pointer isn't coming up, non-Athenian, and we clicked women. And so that produces a list of 1,921 entries were found, but only 1,823 are individuals. In other words, some have Roman names, or they have alternate names, but when it couldn't restore quite sure, and so the number of people is 1,823. That's about twice as many people, just foreign women in Athens, as are known of whole population of any other state. That's just the foreign women in Athens. So we have a large database. Why do we have so many names? They are obsessed with their names. That's what democracy does. It just simply drives the brain wild about seeing your name in print, and that's what they did. Now, I mentioned Kafisia. We put it on the screen when we have the map, the Dean map, and here we can get all the people of Kafisia. Incidentally, you could also get all the people of all the inscriptions that were found at Kafisia, if you want to put in the appropriate lower pink box and Kafisia. But these are Kefis. That's all you had to do up here to bring up this list of the people from that particular dean. We have a highly specialized request here. We divide our spoils into various categories, and gravestones lend themselves. They come from very simple plaques on the ground to a round circular, we call them columella, columellae. We use Latin, of course. It's the language of the background of this. We still have publications in epigraphy that are in Latin. Anyway, and then they grow up to more and more elaborate. So they're an economic indicator of what level. So here, sculptured gravestone, that's the highest level. That's the most expensive grave monument. And those people are obviously from wealthy families. The number of entries, these are foreign women on sculptured gravestones. We have 145 entries, but because of this overlap, alternate names and so on, there are 128 different people. Gives you some idea of the demography of the city-state of Athens, and you can exploit that by using those limitations on the limitations of various sorts on the data that you want to. Now I move into the most recent part, and this is where you have to take your form, and in the last bottom pink, type in image in capital letters. And I'll bring up all the inscriptions we have now. You can limit it, of course, in many ways. All the inscriptions for which we have a documentation in front of you, and if you take your, we have it in the form. If you put one of these two numbers in, you'll have Themistocles and his father. Now this is not the great Themistocles. This is a great-grandson that has been found on a recent unpublished inscription. And I have here a photograph, and if you click on the image, it'll bring up the photographs of that particular. We're going to help retrieve information on this. We're deep down in the excavation the last couple of years, expecting the whole wall of St. Philip Street to fall on us at any moment. We'd be sacrificed for the sake of knowledge. In any case, you can click on that and you get up the whole series of images of this new unpublished inscription. And if you bring it out in Catamari or something like that, you'll have a publication immediately before tomorrow morning, like Samsi that in the Moscow University. So we spent days, weeks, over several years studying the surface of this, doing what I've learned over 60 years, using water. We used to use charcoal. That's bad now because you can't get it off. One time we even used stuff, I better not mention it, from a print cartridge, and so on. Well, we used just dirt on the ground. So I spent hours and hours trying to get these letters. Then Craig came down, Craig Mousey, the photographer, now retired, and took these pictures over 3 or 4 hours, and they are just incredible. So my text in a publication coming out, don't know when, it will have these highly digitized, and you click on the right click and you bring it up on your screen, and that's how I established the text of this. So we have here, and you can look up this new Themistocles, his new person, incidentally. He's the most important person. We know that from his location in this. So he's a very rich person. This is 3 generations after the Themistocles we knew, famous for building the Navy of Athens, working on the reformations of Cleisthenes, especially the military factor there. So that's new, interesting, not very important though, of course, but we have lots and lots of other names on this, and you can go down through, explore that, and test, and you have as much information as I have, so you can say that Traill is Traillos, and you can say he's crazy. I have a better reading, and I can see. And I was at a lecture last year in Winnipeg, Gothic Association, and I put one of these slides up, and I saw in front of me a new letter that I hadn't read, not really important, but everybody was amused, and I had 50 witnesses there. We were considered it great in the past if you got 1 or 2 people come over and see a new letter that you'd put water and charcoal, dirt, not permitted. So we have that, and then we move, and I passed around this squeeze because it represents another new inscription, much, much later than the great-grandson of Themistocles. This is down into the middle of the 2nd century after the Common Era. And we have, this is part of the package I'm putting together with everyone else's help, of course. It contains a reference to, in the first line, a woman and her son. We don't find that often in dedications, place to place, but we also found the same names on a curse tablet. Now, curse tablets are a specialty. They're all over the place, but there are 500 of them from ancient Athens, and a friend of mine, Jaime Corbera, has just brought out a large volume of these 500. And they do all kinds of things, and they cover a whole different language. They have a 4-letter word with F in it. F is not, it's the 3rd letter. I'm not going to speak because a lightning bolt will come. It's way up about 3 degrees above ours on the Richter scale, and so on. So they're very interesting, curious, and they have names that are very strange. In this one, if you look at it, you can actually see letters. We've never had, to my knowledge, a publication of a curse tablet where you could read the letters. They're always decorative. They showed you the shape of the thing and so on, but you had to believe. So we trusted on the transcripts that the editors gave of this sort of thing. I know I'm getting close, but I have a couple more minutes. You can actually read the letters there, and I have a text, and I'll show you. And we have somebody here named Eutukianos. That means good lucky. With the Ianos means he's son of good lucky. And sure enough, we have his mother, who's named Good Lucky. Now guess who his opponent is? Someone called Loser. Secundus. Would you want to be in that situation if you were a trained professional athlete and you're going to the Olympic Games or whatever these are? Incidentally, one of my students wrote on a test, the Olympic Games were held every 4 years and lasted 5. Okay, well, we have this poor guy named Secundus, and there's no silver and bronze, as you know, it's winner take all, up against somebody who is the son of Good Lucky, who is actually the son of a mother named Good Lucky. Well, he is, no wonder you resorted to a curse tablet when you're in a situation like that. So this is the first time we've been able to recognize and read a curse tablet. And it's for everybody on the web. You can blow this up, you can manipulate it, you can do all sorts of things. We've never had this facility in the past, and that's why I'm talking in such a way. Incidentally, if you want to, I have the numbers here. I don't think they're on your handout where you can just get access to them, but you can put in Good Lucky, and you can put in all sorts of other information, and you can find a mother and a son, and that's why I've tied them in with the people we have here. I move to our last, and you can sympathize with my wife, why she's not here, and this is the end, so to speak, but not quite. Along with the Olympic Games were held every 4 years and lasted 5. I have another, this is a joke, I think, this whole business. Incidentally, if we have son of Good Lucky, who is the son of Good Lucky, we have other interesting names in our database. One boy is called No Trouble. We don't have his brother's name, but you can guess his nickname. And sure enough, Corinna's sister, working as an ER doctor, had a patient came in named Simmer Down Brown. So these things happen. We actually have one of the most interesting, we have an Archon named Archon, that's Mr. President. We have somebody named Pederast. Okay, that's barely acceptable in antiquity, might be, but guess what his function was? He was protector of the youths, Prostates ton ephibon. Well, I'm going to finish only with one last and very important fact. It came along with the Olympic on one of my Greek history tests. I have lots from my scientific terminology, but I'm not going to waste any more time. In the Greek history test, it was written about Homer, and the answer went this way. The Iliad and the Odyssey were not written by Homer, but by a person of the same name. I think I'd better quit. Not ahead.
Please go on, we want more.
Oh, well, I have lots. Don't say that. Oh, Jacques.
Thank you.
Oh,
No, it's fantastic. This is really, you know, he makes things so easy, eh? So easy. You say, oh, over the web, so put this, put that, put, you know, but you can't imagine the hours and days and weeks and months and years.
60 years, 60,000 hours.
Voilà. You see, to get this together. It's a fascinating tool. You make it even more fascinating. And I want to thank you very, very much for being with us.
I tried to
this
do a
evening.
joke in a recent publication. Our subject, to my knowledge, has never had a joke published in. All the things are very funny in retrospect. The people make complete asses of themselves. Even our great Homer Thompson, he identified the Royal Stowe and he got the wrong building. And of course, he was so smart, he was better than any AI, and so on, had experience. But we make asses of ourselves. Our editors will not accept a joke, and that's why I spent so much time on that part there. Yes.
Do we have questions for Professor? Yes, I have to put this on here. Sorry. Thank you. You have? Yes. I move on with the mic here.
Really fascinating. Thank you so much. The question I have relates to the inscriptions themselves. Are they protected? Are they? I mean,
yes.
what you know, is the state or the doing something to try to protect?
Yes. They're even loved, that's how much. They're revered in some places. There's a form of adulation almost. We have an epigraphical museum in Athens. No other city, to my knowledge, has such an institution. It's got 13,500 inscriptions. They're all nicely on shelves and everything. The Agora, where I've been working for the last 60 years or so, has a large section of the basement. They've got 8,000, nearly 8,000 inscriptions. So you're talking over 20,000. And then Eleusis has 1,000 and so on. There must be 50,000 of these things around Athens. Attica. There's nothing like that anywhere I know of in the world. They were obsessed with writing, and there's no question about it. I have a friend, Merle Langdon, who studies rupestral. These are scratchings on the stone, thereby supposedly illiterate shepherds, but they're not illiterate. They can scratch their name. One of them even has an inscription. Look at my letters. So proud of that. So we have a high rate of illiteracy. I didn't digress on, I talked about Abrilis, but the importance of women in the whole educational system. They didn't have schools. Oh, Socrates had like postgraduate, postdoctoral school, but the women and the grandmothers were the educators, and that's why they're so important. And one reason, many reasons, in the database. I was giving a lecture, well, must be 50 years ago, at Harvard, and Emily Vermeulen, the late Emma, was along and asked, how many different professions do you have listed for women? And I said, wait a moment, I have access to a computer. And we looked and we found over 200 different professions in Athens that they could be identified with. So this was a large resource that was untapped. Yes, we have those museums, and they are treasured now. One thing about inscriptions, with rare exception, they're not as prized as sculpture. So people do not relish stealing them, and they are protected that way. The modern people are more illiterate in some ways than the ancients. And I better be careful what I said, but Mr. Vanderpoel did a study of the Austria. I mentioned that he's responsible for the international map and so much else in my life. He's just a marvelous person, and several people in this audience knew him firsthand too. Jerry was on some of those rambles we had where we found inscriptions and so on. He was famous for saying, you have to know what the inscription says before you can read it. And also there's a corollary to that. You have to know where they're located so you can find them. But inscriptions are important, but fortunately, most of them are still in Greece. Oh, they've taken them when they have some sculpture attached. They've stolen them and taken them elsewhere. But by and large, and a few of them have wandered on their own. People helped them. But the vast majority are still here in Athens, and Merle finds them. He has drive-by, if you can believe it, inscription reading. He's found them on Lycabettus. He's found them in downtown. The bedrock, Athens is full of bedrock, and that just lends itself. But you have to have the right light. Winter solstice is great when the sun is low in the sky, morning and night, and that brings out these things that you walked on. Mr. Vanderpoel used to talk about walking on an inscription in the Agora. He never knew it was there until the right light, and Laura Gadsbury found it, and so on. I'm wondering. Sorry, you see, I'm used to being non-stop blab in class.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you so much for this fascinating talk and all of this work. I had a question regarding names that could be a name or could be a title, and how you approach that. Thinking specifically about funerary monuments, something like Tithi, which is a nurse.
We have resources we've developed by trial and error where we're not sure if it's a name. We have a special category for that. And I have to say that that guy Pederastes, many people might think that that was just an epithet, an abusive term. I think it is his real name, and so on, but I'm not sure I've got the question, but there are many times when we're not quite sure. We try to handle that as best we can. Of course, it should not be in the database if it isn't a name, but we throw no errors out. I learned that from from Ben Merritt, one of my other three teachers of this, four, count Mary White, that you find somebody made a mistake. The figurists do that all. I think they do it deliberately sometimes so they can correct theirs and get another publication. But the mistakes have a habit sometimes of coming back as truths. Also, we try to preserve a history of. If I should have put that sample up, I guess it was. We have several readings. One thing we developed very early because bigraphers fight so much, and you have to accommodate their belligerent nature. So we have, we didn't take a sample, sorry about that. But we usually have 2 or 3 or 4 or maybe 9 or 10 different readings. We as editors feel that we should show our preference, what we think is the best. Sometimes we can't. So we have a variety of different readings. There's one antiphon as Archon, which is a famous, famous controversy, and epigraphers had torn flesh over the reading of this name. Well, we have 9 separate readings there. We give our preference for one, but it's barely a preference. So we list them. We have something called recti, how the reading is related, the previous one to the previous one, the previous one, and so on. So that is very important for epigraphers, and actually for people who do manuscripts, we have literary things also in the database, and papyri, and of course these curse tablets, which are a form of epigraphy. This new technology is going to open a whole can of worms. There are going to be all sorts of people. In the past, we depended on the transcript, something that somebody wrote, usually a German, usually we're beginning with K as name, Kirchhoff, Kirchner, Köhler, so on. And that's what we had. Now we can cut right under that and bring up, and so we can trace directly. So we don't have as much variation, or at least we have more control on the variation that the names have. So we had to face that very early because we're in a sport of mudslinging, and epigraphers do not like other epigraphers. All other epigraphers are always wrong, and so on. So you have to have some means of which I want to say holding them to their mistakes. So we keep all the mistakes in. 1/10 of the database is actually mistakes, but they're not always stay that way, so on. It's something pantare, something always in flow.
Thank
I
you.
don't think I answered your question, but
I was have a question I was thinking about the use now, of artificial intelligence.
oh yes.
And what will happen with that? And I mean, with this fantastic database you have.
I talked about jokes. The biggest jokes are those that come out of AI. A couple of years ago, only about 3, I found a curse inscription. I didn't know where it belonged. I couldn't place it. It was non-Attic. Came from the north. Okay, I didn't know, so I put it into AI, and we got the first word wrong. Oh, did I ever screw it up? It was a proper noun and took it as a common noun. Okay, it made a mistake. Then every other word after that, I likened it to Homer Thompson was my mentor in many ways. I was his research associate, he supposedly assistant, we called associate at the Institute for 2 years. Homer misidentified the Royal Stoa. We hadn't found the real one. Bucky Shear found that a few years later. Well, he wrote this incredibly abstruse but well-argued argument of why it was the Stoa of the King. And it got incredibly, he was just that way. He was an AI machine. So the AI got this completely wrong, and so on. I only knew because the next day I put in the 3rd word. I missed the first 2. Now he had picked up on the 3rd word. It restored the first 2. It had everything perfect, and so on. It knows every detail of my private life. I'm sure it does. But it didn't know that it made a fool of itself the previous day. There was no reference to its acidity, a complete travesty of knowledge. and not the slightest idea of a humor. The editor of where I submitted it said I can't have a joke in my article. I said, but there are jokes everywhere in this system, and AI can't find them and so on. Yes, AI is going to have enormous influence because it's got vast resources. But remember, there's one right, and there are just millions and millions and millions more wrong. So it's accumulating more and more wrong stuff, which is a resource too. So you have to keep it under control. You have to keep it on a leash. You have to have leg irons on it sometimes. Or if you let it run your mind, it is, after all, incidentally, I was privileged to work with people, including the Nobel Prize winner, Geoffrey Hinton, at the University of Toronto, because of Dennis, the Greek connection, okay? Everywhere. The gods are Greek, and so on. So we were brought in to this select group, including people in AI. This is 40 years ago or so, more actually, and we thought they were crazy then. Of course they thought we were crazy. Because of Dennis, the Athenians project was pushed to the front, and nobody objected because we were different. We didn't tread on anybody's feet. We were completely crazy, and they were just partially crazy, so on. So that's how we had this connection very early with AI, and I think Merritt was thinking of that many times and saving all the mistakes and whatnot. I haven't answered your question, but it's going to turn things upside down, and these inscriptions, I have to put back that curse tablet, can be read by computers. Not only that, but the writing can be analyzed in mathematical terms with algorithms. I like that word too, because we do Arabic in our scientific terminology. We develop things that can identify that hand exactly, and even without those special tools, you can do that on your own screen, because you can pick out letters and you can match them with other letters and so on. This is not high technology, and it's available to anyone, and AI will run with it, of course. So we have to contend with that, but we have to make sure that we keep track of our own intelligence and don't let that artificial stuff run us. And it's oxymoronic, incidentally, eh? Artificial intelligence. Intelligence can't be artificial. It's got to be real. So
Thank you. Do we have, thank you. Do you have other questions for Professor Traill?
I go by Yannis.
Good. Well, thank you very, very much once again.
Yeah.
Please join us all for a glass of wine. And,
Yeah.
and write your names. I want your names in the guest book here, because
Yes.
Professor
and
Traill may
instead of
think of
watching
doing something with them.
other stuff on TV, go to this program and look it up, and you'll be entertained. You play with it and tell us about our mistakes, and we will thank you.